Hi, everyone. I am here with Dr. Shameka Stewart. Dr. Stewart, could you please let us know your path and your background in regards to AAC and your work with the law as well?
So I have of course, master's in speech language pathology. I received that master's years ago, but from North Carolina Central University. And during my matriculation through my master's, I actually focused on augmentative and alternative communication. So my master's thesis was on AAC, and how youth with Williams syndrome had different language productions and looking at those different sectors. My mentor actually is an AAC guru, well known in the field, Dr. Sheila Bridges, and she kind of guided me through the process. And so I pretty much was trained in severe disabilities, augmentative communication, and implementing AAC with minimally verbal and severe disability populations since it's been about 18 years now.
And then you went on beyond your master's.
Yes, so the criminal justice correlation comes many years later. But after my master's, I went and did a PhD in communication sciences and disorders, again focused on multicultural language and special education and augmentative communication in the Caribbean. So my dissertation focused on AAC implementation in the Caribbean with populations of youth that were not receiving access to such type of interventions and devices or modalities. And so I kind of continued the process. And after I finished my PhD and was doing research in some other sectors around looking at how children with maladaptive behaviors are being classified in the school space and the fatal policings of Black lives is how I ended up then reshifting kind of my focus to the involvement of, the school to confinement pipeline and criminal justice and fatal policings.
Yeah, and I think that that is so important to remember and to acknowledge as, educators and to recognize our roles in students' lives and that we have a lot of power to do a lot of good, but also, unfortunately, you know, it can be restrictive and it can be setting kids up to fall down that pathway of, like you were saying, school to prison, that continuum. But could you please touch on the power differentials that affect AAC users in any system, but specifically that intersectionality between the educational and the justice systems?
So really there isn't really an intersection between the school system and the criminal justice system when it comes to augmentative communication, at least with most of the modalities that are commonly used. And when I say that, what I mean is that if an individual requires a device or anything electronic, and they are involved with the criminal justice system, and sometimes the juvenile confinement spaces, they likely will not have access to that device because they are considered contraband. So having electronics or, things that can be turned into weapons or can be blown up or where you can get communication out are things that you're not allowed to have in a confinement space. And so most times, if there is an individual that requires AAC, most times devices, excuse me, let me say that, in that capacity, they won't have access to the device. When we're talking about the no-tech type of devices, where we're looking at things such as, sign and exact English or even communication cards, a lot of times the disconnect usually is that there's not enough people in the confinement space that understands or knows how to utilize those things. And so an individual having access to those types of modalities or interventions are not likely because you would need someone trained, qualified, and that fully understands it to be present for them to have assistance or access to that.
Which makes me think of the importance of teaching gesture, universal sign, and if the person has the ability to use paper, pencil, pen, paper writing abilities, that those are going to be the most accessible ways to communicate, it sounds like. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, they could be but when you start to talk about those no text simple, modalities that extend from the hands, we get into another animal of then talking about the cognitive abilities of those
Sure.
individuals, knowing
And
how to
also
read and how to write.
motor abilities, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so usually, most times, if it is that severe, whether it is secondary to the acute impact that caused the need for the AAC, or if it's because the individual's, intellectual ability or cognitive ability is low, the ability to read and write and all of that will also be impacted. So using just pen and paper or pencil and paper is usually not very common or easy or accessible as well.
Right. But also just as educators, making sure that we are giving our students access to those unaided ways to communicate, thinking, ahead, but also acknowledging the reality that these people are faced with if they happen to be in that confinement space and unable to access those. So um, I would like to dive in with the thought of knowing that we live in a world that has systems of power and oppression that negatively impact our AAC users. How can we, as therapists and educators, practically support our AAC users to fully and authentically express themselves and participate in their lives?
You mean in a confinement space or just in general?
No, I mean like in schools.
I think there's a lot of there's a lot we can say about that sector. In the schools, I think as therapists and educators, it first starts with us having a broader and better understanding of, augmentative and alternative communication, what it's for, how it benefits, who it's for. A lot of times when I teach the AAC class to the graduate students here. I've taught it for many years, but one of the
And can
things
you
that
remind us, where are you?
I generally don't speak about my
Oh,
exact
okay, that's fine.
location, but I am in a university setting. It's
Okay.
okay. But the ultimately the main thing that I always say to students and to professionals is it's not about you. I think that the biggest problem that we have, especially in the AAC sector, because you're working with a population that is not always able to verbalize or express their wants and needs effectively, is that we make decisions for them. And sometimes those decisions are ones that we think are the best and not actually the best or that works well with their environment, their whole environment, their culture, those type of things. And so I think that one of the biggest things for educators and therapists to remember is that even though you may have a preferred device or modality, you may have a preferred method that you think works, that it may not always be the best approach or option for the child that you're working with. An example I would use is that we have a large influx of everyone using the LAMP system. And however, the LAMP system is not ideal or beneficial to every child for various reasons. But, sometimes we are going around the sector because it's the one we learned about. It's the one we know the most about. It's the one that came out and did the demo, but it may not be the one that works for that child's life, works for that child's culture, works for the child's language capacity. And so we have to keep those things in mind that it's not about us.
Absolutely. And also having that open mindset and knowing that both the individual themselves and parents are huge stakeholders
Right.
and that they need to be at the table whenever decisions are made about communication systems and just centering everything around that student and that family, because ultimately, as educators, we're in and out of lives.
Right.
But
Absolutely.
this is the life of that student, and this communication system should hopefully grow with them throughout their life. And parents and caregivers should be at the center point as well. So I thank you for reminding us of that.
Thank you.
Can you touch on how we as educators can also be culturally sensitive and supportive of um, you know different dialects and different linguistic backgrounds of our OGCOM users?
Yeah, I think, you know, as we talk about cultural and linguistic diversity, I think it's bigger than, dialect. So dialect is a very important part. But sometimes what I'll see is the overgeneralization of a dialect because the clinician is too hyper focused on wanting to attend to the culture. And so at some point it becomes very cringy to see a device where you have, ain't and isn't, and because you're trying to account for what you assume the dialect may have been if the person, organically, verbally communicated. And so, when I think about cultural and linguistic diversity on an AAC device, that includes things like culturally, remembering that culture is more than race and ethnicity. Culture is, your community, who you hang out with, the clothes you wear, the music you listen to. And so devices need to be supported and programmed that, for instance, if you're 15, we know at 15, if we're being honest, 15-year-olds are cursing. And so this device may have a few curse words on it, may have a hell no on there, because as a teenager, that's what you do. And so to make this very, I call it, this very vanilla, this plain lasagna, there's no ground beef in the spaghetti type of device for the children is problematic because it's not realistic to their culture and their upbringing. So I think shifting away from being so focused on dialect to more focused on idiolects, how do children speak this in this current generation? They're saying, I don't know the words, but Riz and lit, and those should be on the device. The curse words, if they are cursing, should be on the device. The type of foods they like to eat should be on the device, more so than worrying about, the final consonant deletion of ED or, those type of things.
Thank you for giving us that more holistic view on that and making sure that we're, again, centering the full culture and also including the student, including the family in on those conversations,
Absolutely.
learning from our students, learning from our families, because we can't know everything and we shouldn't assume anything about our students. So having that co-construction, co-editing, letting the child take the lead on some of these things is going to be super important. So thank you for that. What are other opportunities for growth and learning if a listener wanted to learn more about these topics?
I think it's a good question. You've kind of opened up another conversation. We don't have enough opportunities around AAC out there for people to learn about AAC as a whole, but then also when you start to narrow it down to talking about AAC and culture and specific populations, it gets that much more limited or scarce. So I think that that's a good conversation to have is where are the platforms or where do we start to build the platforms that can teach us more about culture diversity in AAC? Honestly, at this current moment, I don't know off the top of my head where I can say you can go to this site and learn about this. I do know we have Isaac, which is the International Society of AAC, which broadens the conversation outside of the United States. But when you're talking about if you have a Latinx client here in the US or a Black client here in the US, where that happens, I think your resources are going to be reaching out to, speech and language pathologists or educators that work in the field of AAC that have an understanding of the cultural and linguistic diversity, like Dr. Sheila Bridges, like Ovita Harris, those individuals who are the gurus to the
Like
AAC.
Dr. Shameka Stewart.
We'll add me in it. Those are my mentors. So I guess like me, if you want to,
Yes.
but yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
Do you have any, are you on any other podcasts? Do you have any other coursework for, commercial consumption?
I do. They're not focused on AAC, however.
Okay. But also
But
just knowing that a lot of times what is culturally and linguistically diverse can apply through the lens of AAC, that we need to, be clinicians and be educators who are reflective and apply those broad strokes down to the nitty-gritty of OGCOM,
right.
right?
Yeah, and see, I mean, you sometimes it takes having a conversation for someone to, put you back in focus. And I may need to, create an AAC culture diversity webinar. I do a lot of webinars and I've never thought to bring that back into the conversation. But
Well, you
yeah,
have expertise in both of those areas. So I think that there's very few people out there that can speak to it in a way that you can through that lens. So I think that uh,
That's true. And
I think educators would be hungry for this information.
I thank you for that because it's not something that, was on my radar that I thought about, but it's a conversation to have. So thank you, Bridget, Miss Salberg, everybody thank her. But um I do take students out of the country at least once or twice a year. And where we go is a special needs school where primarily everybody is minimally verbal or nonverbal. A lot of AAC happens there. So the students get a lot of hands-on experience of learning different systems like PECs and signing exact English. And very rarely do I let them use electronics. So they're learning communication cards. And so that happens student-wise. Other platforms where I just talk about culture. I do a lot of talk about culture on my business Instagram account, Dr. Juvenile Forensic _SLP. And then I have the podcast, but my podcast focuses on youth and criminal justice and cognitive and communication disorders. But every once in a while, I might, talk about something related to augmentative communication, low tech or no tech modalities.
Yeah, I think it's so important to remember what you had shared earlier about low tech and no tech and the value that that brings and the transferability throughout different, contexts and settings. And I
Mhm.
am curious, we end every podcast episode with this question. Can you share a story about a favorite AAC moment with an AAC user?
Yes. So one of the reasons why I got into the field of speech and language pathology, my first degree is computer science. And so I had graduated, realized, yeah, I had to do a master's. I wasn't doing a master's, was going about my business. And my little cousin was born with cerebral palsy. And so she has always been nonverbal. And she had, I can't even, I want to say it was like a Go Talk. This is like very years ago, 90s, old, big, huge device. And she had an assistant that would come. I don't think that she was a speech pathologist, but she would come every once in a while and assist her. And I remember a day where I watched the transition where it registered to her that, oh, I have to use this big machine to communicate something. And she had pressed the cell at that time, it was these little squares, and asked for popcorn. She loved popcorn. And that was like a big like aha moment for me. That kind of why when I did go back for my master's, I wanted to do my thesis and focus on AAC because I remembered, my little cousin having that connection. And she ended up going to community college, graduating, all of these amazing things, all with still using a device and having a note taker to assist her.
Yeah, the power of being able to autonomously communicate whatever you want to say, whenever you want to say it, to whomever you want to say it, like that's the magic, right?
Yeah, it's always
Okay,
a good
thank you
thing.
so much, Dr. Stewart. We really appreciate your insight into this, and
You.
I hope people check out more of your work because I think that this is a relatively unexplored niche within the OGCOM space. So thank you so much.
Thank you.